Thank you, computer. I don't know if y'all remember. I'm a Star Trek fan. All elements of Star Trek, but one of my favorite Star Trek movies is Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home, where they go back in time and they get spoiler alert by the way, where they get the humpback whales and bring them back and forward in time and all that. Well, while they're in 1985, Scotty is trying to convert the ship that they've stolen that can go back in time to convert it into a tank that can hold these humpback whales, because it's not just the weight of the whales, but the weight of the water that's in them and all that. And so in Star Trek time, it's the 24th century or whatever, and they've come up with an idea called transparent aluminum, which can take it makes it a strong see-through, almost like plexiglass almost, but it can hold like 900 million gallons of water pressure, that kind of thing. And but there's nothing like that in 1985. So Scotty, y'all know Scotty, Captain, I just can't do it. He ends up going to this manufacturing company and he's telling them, he's doing a tour through there. He's from, under the guise that he's this scientific wizard from Scotland, and tells him, how much, what kind of see-through barrier could you present to me that could hold 900 million gallons of water? He says, oh, we've got 6 foot plexiglass, 6 foot thick plexiglass here. We've got that in Scotland. What if I told you there was a way to make it where it was only 6 inches thick? Would you be interested in that? Oh, of course. Says, please use the computer, show me. So Scotty sits down at the computer and computer, this is 1985, nothing. Dr. McCoy is standing beside him, sees this little thing. Of course, it's floating, with a wire. He picks it up and hands it to Scotty, and Scotty goes, "Computer!" and the manufacturing guy there, he says, just use the keyboard. And Scotty's like, the keyboard, how quaint. Anyway, okay. So, I only say that because of technology we're using. We hear the computer kick on and say, we're recording. So, for those at home, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to share this screen now, and we're going to hear some interesting things. So, let's get going. Share. Okay. Get this thing to presentation mode. Let's get this there. Try the keyboard. How quaint. Okay, so this is part 8, and it means we've been doing it for 8 weeks. Hard to believe it's been that long. So as we begin the narrative here, we're going to find out that the Philistines have drawn up a battle line against the Israelites led by Saul in the valley of Elah, which is right here in the green. Well, it's green to me. These 5 cities here you can see are the 5 cities of the Philistines. Although there were 6, there was another one that's kind of in the middle here. It wasn't as big, but it was still a center. But you've got the Philistines on one side, on the south side here, near Soko. And then you've got the Israelites that are here near Azekah. Okay? So there's a closer idea of it. And it's got this river that runs, or wadi that runs through it. It's believed to be dry at this point. So that's how wadis work. They only fill up with water when it rains, and they dry out real quickly. Okay, so let's go ahead and read our narrative here, starting in chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. Saul and the Israelites, yeah, I know what names. Saul and the Israelites gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and formed ranks against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. Some of y'all may have 9 cubits or whatever. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, not letter mail, but chain mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The word Soko, you're going to find that I love names. I think they give meaning to what we're doing, and sometimes it's kind of ironic, the names that are happening here. Soko means defense. So that's what side the Philistines were on. Azekah means strength of the walls, and that's what side the Israelites are on. Ephes Dammim means border of blood. What a name. Elah, the valley of Elah. Elah means oak, so we can imagine that this valley may have some live oaks or whatever there. Goliath, here it means revolution. It does have another meaning though. Goliath can also mean exile. And I challenge you to think about, if we use that definition of exile, that the first time we see David, he's God's chosen for the land of Israel. And that eventually the line of David will continue as the people go into exile and out of exile. So this is their first major challenge. And they're going against a fellow whose name is exile. So, depending on which Bible dictionary or measure, reference of measurements and things, most people believe that this 6 cubits or 9 cubits, whichever definition or whichever word you have in your text, means somewhere between 8'5" and 9'2". That's not out of the ordinary. We get, we have basketball players that are 8 feet tall. Manute Bol, he was so tall that he was like 8'3". Played for the Washington Bullets before they became the Washington Wizards. He was so tall he could stand and touch the top of the rim, and that's over 10 feet tall. The rim is. He could touch it without even leaving the floor, but he only weighed like 105 pounds. Oh, yeah. So, Goliath's not like this. He's tall, but he. He's weighty. He's got a lot of weight on him because he's got all this armor on him that weighs heavily too. So he's got to be able to withstand that weight as well. Most scholars, this is not, I would say, most scholars believe he was tall. I would reckon they would go on the shorter side of this. Some would even say that he wasn't even taller than maybe 6'10". So, take it as you will. The bigger we make Goliath, the more pronounced the story is. So,
he was tall, for sure.
He was big. He was big according to, he went against the standards of he was bigger than the surrounding people. Greaves, if you don't know what greaves are, they're shin guards. So, in case you wanted to know that. The shaft of his spear, I'm trying to find it here. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Okay, we've got this idea of the battle of one-on-one. Instead of sending all your soldiers out to battle and fight and do all this and risk losing thousands of people. There was this idea in the ancient Near East of this one-on-one battle. That way, whichever champion there was, that would be who won the fight. I would
It'd be like Zelensky and,
Putin.
yeah.
A little bit, sure. Well, yeah, it has its benefits. However, it had one problem with doing battle that way is that usually there was a stronger force. They usually were not equally matched. And so if they went out to battle that way, the one with the stronger force, regardless of whether they won or lost, they were going to attack anyway. So yeah, there was a problem. They did not honor that one-on-one battle. And the same thing with the one of weaker force. If they lost that one-on-one, well, they're not going down swing, just sitting there. They're going to fight too. So yeah, it didn't always work out that way. So 5,000 shekels of bronze comes to about 126 pounds. That's that was his other thing, I think. I can't remember. Anyway.
A javelin and bronze, the shaft of the spear's head weighed 600 shekels.
Yeah, 600 shekels of iron is about 17 pounds. So the spear itself was that, so shield bearer had to be strong. So Goliath is out there with his shield bearer. Now, if Goliath is wearing all this and the armor bearer is carrying his stuff for him while he's going out there, that armor bearer had to be pretty weighty too. So, okay, on to verse 12. Now, David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 eldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. We already heard those names before. I wish we had the other 4 names. But, David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And for 40 days, the Philistines came forward and took his stand morning and evening. So David is going back and forth between the battlefield and the sheep because he's got a responsibility to the sheep, but he's carrying supplies back and forth from Jesse. And we'll get to why that may be here in a minute. We get this idea of 40 days that Goliath issued this challenge, 40 days. Well, 40 days can mean a long time. It usually indicates this concept of some kind of trial that's going on too, some kind of problem that's going on. And obviously this was a big problem. Jesse said to his son David, take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See how your brothers fare and bring some token from them. So we've got these 10 loaves for his brothers in their unit. 10 cheeses for the garrison commander. Here, Jesse may be seeking protection for his sons from the front lines. So, I mean, this is quite a bit of stuff here. 10 loaves of bread and 10 cheeses, and not to mention the parched grain and all that. There may be an idea of Jesse bribing the commander. Hey, keep my sons out of this battle. This don't, we're hearing everything's going on back here. We don't like it, so keep them safe. But Jesse also asks David to bring back some proof that his older brothers are all right. And that's that token. Verse 19. Let's see. For Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah, fighting for the Philistines, fighting with the Philistines. David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle lines, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. You see what I'm getting at? This one-on-one may not be, really true. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. Now, this walk from from Bethlehem to the Valley of Elah is about 15 miles. So David has been making this trip several times. So gives you an idea. He mentions keeper twice. He left a sheep with a keeper. Don't know who that is, but a keeper. And he also mentions that David left the things that he brought with him in charge of the keeper of the baggage. So he was probably challenged when he got to the military encampment there. He was probably challenged, halt, who goes there, step forward and be recognized, kind of thing. And so he has to leave those things there with people in charge. So we see here that it's not one-to-one anymore. The Israelites are prepared to do battle, army to army. So, okay, 24. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. The Israelites said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. The king will greatly enrich the man who kills him and will give him his daughter and make his family free in Israel." David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The people answered him in the same way, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." The soldiers are trying to bait each other into engaging in battle. Okay,
You go after.
right. You think you're brave? Go ahead. Now David is here. He's not speaking as one who's a soldier. He's speaking as a keeper of the sheep. He's one of the commoners trying to figure out what's going on here. 28. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down just to see the battle." David said, "What have I done now? It's only a question." He turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. So his older brother Eliab is angry because David is embarrassing him right here in front of the rest of his troop. I've been in those circumstances. We used to egg each other on all the time. I dare you to say that in front of Sergeant Simpson. Because his brothers are afraid too. And David being there asking these questions it is creating a very awkward moment for his older brothers because they're afraid and they don't want to look afraid in front of other people. So verse 31. Sorry, I get there. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." So we get this idea, kind of like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. If y'all know that reference from Star Wars. I'm more a Star Trek fan, like I said, but I like Star Wars too. So, I didn't mention when David arrived in camp. All the people, all the soldiers are saying, "Who's this defying the army of Saul?" Well, David, from the moment he's arriving, it's not the army of Saul, it's the armies of the living God.
Right.
So, just a thought. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul at this point's given up. David is, he can't convince David not to do something. Go ahead. You want to die? You want to die? Go ahead. But
David has so much confidence. He really did have that.
Well, David was confident, but what does that say about Saul? Saul is not. So Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I'm not used to them. So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. 5 smooth stones.
Yes.
I mean, obviously he's preparing. This is his weapon of choice. He knows how to use it, but why 5 stones? Anybody, any ideas?
4 miss.
4 misses? Now, that's a good theory, but what did Theodora say about David's attitude?
He was very confident.
He was very confident and he's skilled in this sling. Well, I'm glad you asked. Why not just 1 stone? Y'all want a spoiler now or do y'all want it later? Okay. We're going to read as we go through Samuel, both first and second. We're going to read when David, has his own little army and things. We're going to read about other giants, and they're all called the sons of Wrath. They're Raphites, R-A-P-H, the sons of Wrath. Goliath was a son of Wrath, and it's believed that Saul, this is one of those minority views, okay? It's believed that Saul may have had 4 brothers that were all giants too. They were sons of Wrath. And we're going to read about 4 other giants that are killed by David's army later on. And some of them, they give descriptions of them too. I don't know whether y'all read them, but one of them had 6 fingers and 6 toes on his hand, hands and feet. But they were all giants. So anyway, I am of that minority mind, that he grabbed 5 stones, 1 for each of the sons of Wrath, just in case the other 4 charged him. So anyway, that's my thought.
Boy, you are confident.
Look, I'm not lying. There are 4 other named sons of Wrath, and we're gonna get to them. I promise you.
Did you say Saul was a son of Wrath?
No. Did I say Saul?
I thought you did.
Yeah.
Goliath. Goliath. is the
Oh,
son.
okay.
Okay, so
He
there's,
was big, he was tall and handsome.
yeah, no, I meant Goliath. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Goliath, TH, was a son of Wrath, PH. So there's an idea of what the sling may have looked like. That's a modern day version of what it is. That's stolen off the internet or something. Anybody can go look. But anyway, that's kind of what it would have been. Okay, on to verse 41. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, by Goliath's gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air, to the wild animals of the field. Bring it on. But that's the thought that sticks in my mind is Rocky. In Rocky 4, he's battling this Russian,
Yes, he is.
and the Russian says, I must break you. I can't speak Russian, but I must break you. And Rocky just looks at him and says, go for it. But David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. So Goliath is offended here. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? He's basically saying, come on, let's make this quick.
Why does this mention sticks? Because David didn't carry sticks.
Right. Well, it's the narrative. The writer, yeah, who knows?
Well, he's making it equivalent to something no more than a stick.
Maybe.
Yeah, he's a stick.
Yeah,
David is.
Yeah.
A little thing compared to him.
Now, this is a stretch, but I say, David responds, I don't come before you with man-made weapons, but with those made by the hand of God. Well, the sling he obviously had to make by his hand. It just didn't exist in nature, but to use stones,
Yeah.
those stones weren't fashioned by human hands. They were fashioned by nature. And that's
Who's
what
that out in the,
it's John.
oh, okay. I keep seeing bodies moving.
It's John. 46. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This is David still speaking. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air, to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand.
That's good.
So David responds to Goliath's statement of, come on, you offend me, let's make this quick. He responds with his own. I speak to the Lord, and the Lord says, let's make this quick. So when the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. So David kills him with a sling and a stone.
Yeah.
This is one of those Bible trivia questions that I argued during a competition. Let's read further and you'll find out. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. He grasped his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him. Then he cut off his head with it. So Goliath gets killed twice.
Yeah, overkill.
He was still breathing.
And I argued this point during this was one of those, Bible trivia contests between churches. It was supposed to be fun, but I didn't, I took the fun out of it. Because when they said, how was Goliath killed? I said, his head was cut off with a sword. No, he got killed with a sling and a stone. Well, it's right there. David ran, stood over this one, he grasped his sword, drew it out of his sheath, and killed him. So, anyway.
Yeah.
This version says after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword.
Yeah.
He's
So
dead.
the snake, the right.
We were using
side
King
of the-
James. Yeah. In King James, it says slew.
Yes. Yeah.
He
Okay,
slew him.
and it's closest to the original translation.
Well,
no.
it depends. It depends.
They didn't have.
Each of our modern translations use a particular text.
Right.
King James used a very specific text. So NIV, they used another text. So it depends on which text you come from, which codex you come from. So that's why there are discrepancies or differences between the different translations. That would be a class in itself, was coming up with how the translations came about.
He's dead anyway.
Yeah, he's dead.
And he's really dead when he doesn't have a
Yeah.
hand.
And there's the famous art of David holding Goliath.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The troops of Israel and Judah rose up with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sharaim as far as Gath and Ekron. The Israelites came back from chasing the Philistines and they plundered their camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. So Sharaim means two gates. That I am at the end of a word means it's multiple, means multiple. So Share or Shar means gate, and the M on the end of it means two or multiple. The head of Goliath is now in Jerusalem, and this says David took the armor and put it in his tent. Well, he didn't have a tent; it was Saul's tent.
Okay, I would say, we're in the tent.
Verse 55. I'm trying to get there. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. Then The king said, inquire whose son the stripling is. On David's return from killing the Philistine, Abner took him, brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Saul is in so much shock that he cannot even recognize the young man who's been providing him with music therapy, the one that soothes his soul. Maybe David's appearance from after the battle is affecting his appearance. I like to think that Saul's just not used to seeing the full spirit of the Lord. Okay. But Saul needs to know this information for a future vetting, possibly. You remember what the soldiers were saying, whoever kills the Philistine, Saul's going to give him his daughter in marriage. So next week, we're going to be, next week, David makes a covenant with Jonathan, avoids being killed by Saul twice, marries Saul's daughter, Michal, and escapes capture and flees to Samuel's aid. Now, I've got up there next time, read Psalm 151. If you look in your Bible, you're not going to find a Psalm 151. It stops at 150. There are apocryphal books, books that kind of fit in between the Testaments. Psalm 151 is one of those. I will try to send that out to everybody this week, a copy of that. It's not a long psalm, but it's neat because it talks about what we just read. It's believed to be a later work. I just thought it might be interesting to look at. So
Do they think that David wrote it?
Not if it's later.
it's right. It's attributed to David, but there's no other proof of it. It was not found during Hezekiah's reign. It was not found, and that was when a lot of them were found, was during Hezekiah's reign. So it's believed to be a later thing, but it talks specifically about David's battle with Goliath. So, one other note that I wanted to bring up, and this is another one of those minority views. I put a lot of interest into how names come up, and Hebrew names, biblical names, and how they transfer and things. We're in Lent, we're coming up on Easter. Anybody know where Jesus was crucified? What's the name of it? Golgotha. There is a growing support right now. Again, I'm of this mind. It's not the predominant view yet. And what does Golgotha mean?
Place of the skull.
Place of the skull. Whose skull?
Maybe Goliath.
Maybe Goliath's skull. They both start with that word G-O-L, Gol. Anyway, food for thought. Just thought y'all would like to know that the Israelites escaped death at the hands of Gaul, and Jesus succumbed to death at Gaul. Anyway, okay, just food for thought. We're done. Any questions, concerns, criticisms, complaints? Anything starts with a C or Q?
So, to clarify for my own little petty thought, where the conventional thought about David killing a giant falls into a bit of an analogy is in the description of Goliath. Right?
You mean how he was killed?
Yeah. Well, no. What Goliath looked like.
Well, I mean, there are some arguments about that. The one big argument is that the people in the ancient Near East weren't very big to begin with, that they were, I'm 5'8", they were, that would have been tall for them. And so, right, if you get a fella who's 6'5", or a foot taller, 6'8", but this would have been a very tall guy, compared to everyone around him. He probably had some girth because of the armor itself, because even if he was only 6 foot, even if he's only 6 foot, the weight of the armor that he would have had compared to what the Israelites had would have been so much more because they were skilled bronze formers, makers. You know, the Israelites were not. The Israelites relied on other people to make their stuff. So,
If you go to Jerusalem, they built a church over everything. But there, and Constantine's mother went back 300 years later and said, well, this was here and this was here, but there is a place where they claim the cross was set, and it's under a church, and right over here is the place where he was buried. I mean, it's all,
Choreographed.
well,
Sure, tours.
yeah, Constantine's mother, I think her name was Helen or Helena or something like that. She prompted a lot of what Christianity has become, especially the Catholic Church.
they built a church over everything, but they haven't built a church over the Sea of Galilee.
Yes,
And you can go there and you can imagine the Sermon on the Mount. You know, you can imagine, you know, that's sort of authentic.
yeah, there's a thing that goes around, you know, you mentioned the cross, and all these different churches around the world have this piece of the cross, you know, this sliver of wood from the cross, and a mathematician has come up with, if you put all of these splinters together, it makes something so large that it couldn't be the cross. It's more than what could be, you know, so, but I will say that those icons, those relics, if they create or bolster faith within somebody, then yeah, I'm all for it. Is it real? Maybe not, but does it bolster your faith? Sure.
Well, the Romans being resourceful, would you not understand the crosses were reused?
Great point. Right. Probably.
Probably yes.
Yeah, because, hewing the wood or whatever, would have been a time consuming thing.
That's work.
Romans were resourceful.
Their Golgotha was kind of like a dump for bodies. I mean, you know, they crucified people left and right, I'm sure.
And that's the predominant theory, is that the place of the skull is that's where they just put.
But it could be both. I mean, it could have both.
Another is that it looked like a skull, setting them out. Yeah, if you look online, that's a very small view, but if you look online, you might see pictures of the hill, and there's 3 indents that look, 2 eye holes in the mouth or whatever, it kind of looks like a skull, but that's one of the lesser looked at ones. So, okay, let me go ahead and end this and let's get out of here. And for those of you,